What's up, y'all? It's Shane. This is Sway Studio Works. Bike's all finished. We're gonna go ahead and get to the build video. All right, first things first, we're gonna knock out this bottom bracket using an anti-seize compound just to prevent any corrosion, and I definitely don't want that bottom bracket to seize when I have to service it again. Inside the cup, we're doing high performance grease, and then again with the anti-seize compound. Working on the cup that is on the drive side first. This is not the adjustable side, and I want that flange to be flush with the bottom bracket itself. I did end up having to get the bottom bracket and the head tube both faced. I also got the bottom bracket and then the rear derailleur hanger chased as well. After that process, something that was impossible for me to once remove could now be finger tightened almost to flush. So super excited by that. And then we are going to prep the remainder of the bottom bracket, the cup and cone style bottom bracket, for install into the non-drive side. So you're seeing me assemble the adjustable side right now with high performance grease, ball bearings. Then we hit the race or the cone with more high performance grease, load this up with ball bearings. Then this is what gets installed to the drive side. Because of the demanding rotational load of a bottom bracket on pedal strokes, I decided to use a high performance grease, which is perfect for that application. It does not, however, make it easy to load those ball bearings into place in the same way that another lube would. All right, so our spindle is loaded up with ball bearings that are going into the drive side cup. And then we are going to screw in the non-drive side cup, which does have some adjustable capacities to it. So we'll screw this in, tighten it down so there's only a little bit of play. And then once I was happy with the adjustments, I threw the lock ring on and torqued everything into place. Once the bottom bracket was installed, it was time to add the cranks and chain rings. So starting with the drive side here, we're just gonna finger tighten that down, hit it with a socket wrench, and then flip the bike around and add the opposite side crank. After the install, there's still a little bit of play, a little bit more than I would like. So after the fact, after everything else is kind of on the bike, I will make sure that that gets tightened down a little bit better. With the bare bones of the drivetrain sort of in place, I turn my attention to the install of the forks. So this starts with pressing the headset cups back into the headset. And again, I mentioned I got this part faced, again, just to make sure that those cups on either side of the headset tube were going to fit flush. After everything was pressed in and flush, we loaded the cups here with some lube. I did not use the high performance grease because the rotational patterns here are more 180 degrees at max, rather than something that is under continuous rotational load. After the top of the head tube, we do the same thing with the fork itself. So again, premium lube on the race right there at the top of the fork, and then we add the ball bearings to that race there. After all the bearings are set, we can go ahead and slide the fork inside the headset tube. We are going to add an adjustable cone onto this threaded fork. On top of that goes a lock ring, and then on top of that is the top lock nut. And then the headset is prepped and ready to have the cockpit installed. Moving right along, now we are going to install the down tube shifters. So right now I was just adding the lever boss that goes on to the braze-on boss, of which everything screws into. Now, one call out here, just make sure your boss is directed the right way. I had mine upside down, everything looked like it was installed correctly. However, once I installed the cabling, the shift cables, I found that it wasn't able to shift properly. So if you are going to complete this job yourself, just make sure that the boss is on correctly. My mistake aside, this installation is very straightforward. You slap on the bosses the right way. You add the levers, and then each has its own respective screw to attach it to the braze-ons. We're gonna head to the front brake system. This is also fairly simple. The challenge comes after the fact when you're dialing in the brakes. There are a lot of different adjustments that need to be made with different lock rings that sit within each layer of the brake. So front goes on, back goes on. This is just a quick install for the moment. Once I get all the other components added, the wheels, the brake cables, and the housing, that's when I'll start to actually dial this in. And here we are prepping our cockpit. So we have our handlebars, our brake levers that we're adding to the handlebars. I ended up getting a vintage CTA set of handlebars that did come off a vintage French bike. So better than the Fuji bars that I had. And then now I just have something for the bike bin for future builds. All right, now we are lubing up the quill stem to drop into the fork itself. Again, not focused on minute details right now, just getting a rough skeleton of the bike so we can keep things moving forward. Now to add the rear derailleur. So more of that anti-seize compound in those threads. Again, I got the dropout threads chased as well, just so there's no paint or residual grime or gunk in those threads when I'm adding the rear derailleur. Throwing on the back wheel here in preparation for the chain install, and then just lightly playing around with the tension on the quick release. Now we're adding the front derailleur, again finger tightening everything so we have the opportunity to adjust down the line. And we'll throw the front wheel on for good measure, make her a roller. As I mentioned in the assessment video, the freewheel is still in really good shape, so no need to replace that. Did buy a new chain, so installing that here. I had to cut 3 links out, but was light work to install after the fact. And I created this little paper clip chain hanger just to remove any tension in the chain, so the install of the quick link was much easier. All right, at this point, all we have left are the shift cables, the brake cables and housing, and the bar tape. So we're gonna go with the front derailleur, rear derailleur cables here. They route underneath the bike through this plastic insert that plugs into the bottom bracket there. One cable is routed to the rear derailleur, the other upwards to the front derailleur. Right now I'm installing the cable housing from Shimano. They are Shimano SLR cables and housing. Thought the red would pair well with some of those accent colors. So we're gonna plug these in. Top tube goes to the right brake. So that runs all the way the length of the top tube. And then the travel for the front brake, obviously much shorter to the front wheel there. So I'm getting these kind of test fit just to determine length, and then I will go ahead and cut these before we full install these cables. Now that the brake lever portion of everything rear brake related is set, we routed the cables, we routed the housing down the top tube and then into the rear brake. And then we duplicate the process for the front brake. All right, I opted for a brand new saddle for this restoration. Wanted something to color match and something that was going to be comfortable while also paying homage to the OG Cell Italia Turbo. So this is a Cell Italia Cubics, and boom, it's on, and we have a bike that I can take in street. But we got to throw on some handlebar tape first. So first attempt at doing this, a little bit of a learning curve, but a great new experience nonetheless. So I don't like my brake cables flopping about vintage style, so we're tacking these here down with some electrical tape. That way wrapping the bars is easier and everything looks super clean. In preparation for wrapping here, the biggest piece of advice that I received was maintain tension. And the way that it was framed to me is if you don't almost rip your handlebar tape as you're installing it, you're doing it wrong. Now, that might be hyperbole to some degree, but yeah, really, really pull this. Additionally, the pathway in which this travels needs to mimic how your hands operate on the bike. So if your hands are on the drop bar portion, your hands will tend to go outward or clockwise on the right, counterclockwise on the left. And if your hands are on the top of the bar, your hands tend to pull back as if you're like revving, a motorcycle. So the goal was to have the tape installed in a direction that mirrors your movement patterns. So we're basically at the conclusion of the build here, and internally I am just beyond excited. I know there are a few final little details that I need to knock out before this bike is done, and I'm just trying to get there. So we're going to do the pedals. Real simple install here, again with the anti-seize compound on the internal external threads of the pedals and the crank arm. That way, if I need to remove these, I totally can. The last little detail were these red accent bottle cage screws. All right, with that, build series is done. Like and subscribe for additional content, more adventures, more projects, and more fun. I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.